Alrighty, let's go. This is the Overwatch League Week 2 predictions on the Pick'em website. Let's get started. For the first couple of matches, we have the Paris Eternal versus the Vancouver Titans, and the Gladiators versus the Spitfire. As for the Paris Eternal versus Vancouver Titans, it's going to be interesting to see what Paris comes out with, considering they've changed so much of their roster, considering most of it went over towards Dallas. Vancouver also showed us some pretty interesting performances over the last week when they went up against the Florida Mayhem, and I believe it was... I don't remember who their other one was. It might have been... Actually, I could just check. Let's look at this from... So Florida Mayhem and the Toronto Defiant. They played the Toronto Defiant. They took maps in both of those series. They seem to put up some fight, so it's not hopeless for the Vancouver Titans. And I really I want them to win. I don't know what Paris is going to come out with. So I'm going to give this a 3-2 to Paris, just because I don't trust Vancouver yet. And I'll probably get this wrong, and Paris will probably win 3-1 or 3-0. Or maybe the Vancouver Titans will win. Who knows? We haven't seen Paris yet, so we don't really know what they're capable of. And same thing goes for the Gladiators versus London. I think the Gladiators are going to win 3-1. I say 3-1 and not 3-0 because I think London are going to benefit from the fact that I think the Gladiators are boomed. Like, I'll be entirely honest. After going 0-2 like that, yikes. Just yikes. But more than that, I just think that London's going to come out and show us some good stuff. But this is a must-win for the Gladiators. They have to win. And they pretty much have to win 3-0 at this point in time, not 3-1. But I think London will probably take a map. For Saturday, it's Houston versus Paris, Boston versus the Gladiators, and Washington versus Dallas. Now, I'm going to just straight up, just because I don't know what Paris is going to come out with, I'm just going to say Houston are going to win 3-0. I don't know how good Paris are going to be. I don't feel good giving them a map. Because even if their roster looks good on paper, the Houston Outlaws beat the San Francisco Shock. It was a 6-map series, but they beat the San Francisco Shock. And for the most part, the Houston Outlaws also beat Dallas. They actually did beat Dallas. They didn't, for the most part, beat Dallas, but they did beat Dallas as well. They went 2-0 in the first week, and they look strong. Chengdu and Piggy on their tank line is fantastic. If they can just maintain the same level of performance, and they can even play slightly below the level of performance that they're playing at when they played against the Shock, they can beat the Paris Eternal 3-0. I'm fairly confident in that. I don't think Paris really stands a chance if unless the Houston Outlaws just completely bang out. There's no way. It's not happening. Boston versus the Gladiators. Now, we haven't seen Boston yet. So they have to play against the Gladiators, and the Gladiators have to win this game as well. Both of the games this week are must-win for the Gladiators. That being said, the Gladiators have notoriously struggled to beat Boston Uprising. I think they've only beaten them once. Period. In franchise history. I could be wrong about that. It could be twice. But they have notoriously struggled to the they have notoriously struggled against Boston, the Gladiators. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to go with 3-2 for Boston. Not particularly because I believe that Boston is strong and the Gladiators are weak, but just because I'd love to see it happen. It's not going to happen. The Gladiators are probably going to win, and I'm probably throwing away um, some points here. But you know what? I want them to win, but I think the Gladiators will probably win 3-1. I don't think that it'll be a 5-mapper. Although, if Boston wins, it's probably going to be a 5-mapper. Either that or the Gladiators will have lost to London on the previous day, and they will just be boomed. And I mean super boomed. And they'll just go just down the rabbit hole. And they'll go 0-4. They're either going to go 2-2 or 0-4 this week. I don't see them going 3-1. I don't see them like beating London and then losing to Boston. If they beat London, they'll probably beat Boston. If they lose to London, they'll probably also lose to Boston, and they will lose all 4 matches probably, and they'll be boomed out of existence. Washington Justice versus the Dallas Fuel. Now we haven't seen Washington yet either, so this is a bit of a gamble, but I'm gonna go with 3-1 Justice because of their roster. I think Dallas probably has better support, but I think you can make the argument that Justice has better DPS and tank line. And maybe the support line will be able to make the Dallas Fuel better. It's hard to tell. But I want to see the Justice do well this year, and that's why I'm making this particular pick. But I think the Justice roster is fairly strong on paper. I could see this swinging either way, though. I could see this going Dallas's way, certainly, if the Justice just don't show up well, do well in the first match. Houston versus London. I'm just going to go and say it. I think this is going to be a 3-0 for Houston. That's what I think, but more realistically, I believe it's probably going to be a 3-1. Most matches in the Overwatch League are always 3-1. You hard unless there's like a huge skill gap, like I mean massive, you hardly ever see a 3-0. It just doesn't really happen that often. But also we haven't really seen London yet, so we don't know how well London's going to do. So we don't know what the gap between Houston and London is. Also, we have no idea if they're going to be able to continue up the same performance that they had last week, which was absolutely ridiculous. So it's just impossible to call, but I think if Houston can maintain, they can do it. They can go 3-1. Easy. Yeah, they can probably go 3-0. Boston Uprising versus the Dallas Fuel. We haven't seen Boston. We haven't seen Dallas. Well, we have seen Dallas. We've seen Dallas. They beat the Gladiators. They lost to Houston in a very close series. I think Dallas probably takes this 3. I'm going to go with 3-0. I don't think I have a single 3-0 besides Houston versus Paris. But Justice versus Washington, I expect to be a 3-0. I mean, it seems unlikely to me that Vancouver takes a map off of Washington. I mean, unless Washington come out and they just look like garbage. You probably shouldn't do your pick'ems all at once like this. But I think it's more entertaining that way. Like, obviously, if you have the opportunity, you should watch the first day, then do the pick'ems for the second day, and then do the pick'ems for the third day. In the next day, because that's how you're going to get more accurate results. Doing it, but this is fine. This is fine. And after this week, we're gonna have information on all of the teams anyway, so we'll pretty much know somewhat where everyone stands. And for Asia, let's save these. And then for the Eastern region, we have Chengdu versus New York as the first match. And New York is a pretty good team. Chengdu just is Chengdu. I'm going to go 3-1 Chengdu. I don't and Chengdu are probably going to disappoint me here. New York are probably going to win. I just don't see it. Until I see what New York are actually capable of, I don't. We watched Chengdu quite literally outclass the Shanghai Dragons. Like, it was not close. Now, granted, Shanghai didn't play great either, but could be something. Could be a method to the madness. Who knows? Philly versus Hangzhou. That's a toughie. I mean, Philly's going to win, but I don't know how many maps I want to give the Spark. Is the question. Because we haven't seen the Spark yet either. The Hangzhou Sparks roster has talent. Unfortunately, they are burdened with the ability to never actually utilize that talent effectively. And I think I'll give them a single map. I don't think it'll be 5 maps. Or if it is 5 maps, it'll be because there was a draw. I want to give Hungzhou the benefit of the doubt that they'll take a map off of Philly, but it is highly likely that Philly just curb stomp them into the ground. And then for the final bit of APAC, we have Spark versus Excelsior and the Chengdu Hunters versus the Philadelphia Fusion. The Chengdu Hunters versus the Philly Fusion is going to be hopefully a banger of a match. What else do you want? I mean, the Chengdu Hunters went 2-0, the Philadelphia Fusion went 2-0. I mean, both teams played the Valiant. But Philly went up against Seoul, but Chengdu went up against Shanghai. It's tough. It's really tough. And I don't know if Chengdu will be able to beat Philly. I don't see it. I'm going to go with 3-2 Philly, though, because I think Chengdu will make it close. But I think Philly overall, after seeing what they did last week and underestimating them last week, I don't think it's possible to underestimate. Well, it's possible to underestimate Philly, but I don't think, given what you've seen from Philly, that you can say that having those two different players is really that much of a hindrance. They took out the Valiant not easily, but the Chengdu Hunters dropped a map to the Valiant, and the Philly Fusion beat Seoul. Like, just straight up, just like, not destroyed Seoul, but they beat Seoul 3-1. Some of the maps were pretty close, but Chengdu Hunters rolled Shanghai, but Shanghai hasn't looked that impressive this season. I'm not going to lie to you. But let's talk about the final match that I haven't done a prediction for, which is Hangzhou Spark versus the New York Excelsior. We have not seen either of these teams, so quite literally anything can happen. Because I am a Spark simp, I'm going to give him a 3-1 victory against New York, and we're just going to leave it at that. I would put 3-2 down, and that's probably more likely if the Spark win is going to be 3-2, but I want them to... I want Spark to impress me, and this is going to be wrong, and I know it's going to be wrong, but I've got the feeling, I've got the feeling that the Spark are going to do it. I don't know why. I don't know how. If the Spark beat the Fusion, I don't think that's going to happen, but if they do, they will probably beat New York as well. But then again, they're probably not going to beat the Fusion, more than likely. But depending on how good they look against the Fusion, I could see them beating New York. All right, well, that's going to be it from me. I do hope you enjoyed. Catch you all in the next one. Peace.